network. So those are the three parts. So let's now jump right in with part one, this week in Bitcoin. So we had an announcement from the SEC. Now the SEC has got rid of the corrupt Gary Gensler, who was executing Operation Choke Point 2.0 on behalf of the Proof of Weapons Network with commands from the top at the Federal Reserve. Now that we've got the corruption out, and we're moving over to the next form of corruption, not doing the bidding of the Federal Reserve, but doing the bidding of the technocratic ones that are asset stripping America of all of its assets so that we can transition to this world of AI and a stablecoin standard. Well, the SEC came out and confirmed that Bitcoin and crypto mining, they are not violating securities laws if you engage in Bitcoin and crypto mining. Now, we already knew that, but it's good to have clarification because those that are contributing to the Bitcoin proof of work network and those that are operating nodes are actually contributing to the disruption and the slow dismantlement of the proof of weapons network, a peaceful resistance against the corruption, death, and destruction that the central banksters have created for their shareholders that are operating these predatory banks. So the SEC says, if you want to engage in Bitcoin mining, it is not a security and you do not need to get the permission of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Before that, they said meme coins were not SEC, but if you've been watching my show for any meaningful time, you had nothing to do with meme coins because we warned you against the ICOs and we warned you against the meme coins, and you respect Bitcoin as the gift that it was given to us. And you have one mission if you choose to accept it. The same mission that I started in 2011 when the Bitcoin community presented right in front of my eyes at that conference how we were going to take down the proof of weapons network using peaceful proof of work. And your mission is to get as much of that Bitcoin as you can. There is only 1 million left to mine. About 20 million have them already been mined. And there is a global race to own your part of the Bitcoin network by simply owning your Bitcoin. And you have one job: own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Peacefully resist fiat currency, the debt-based slavery system that is designed to put you on the wrong end of all the trends that we discuss. And Bitcoin is here to give you, if you think of it long-term as well. So you wouldn't have been messing around with all that stuff, so it doesn't really matter to you. But stable coins are next. They're going to be constructed. There's going to be a market structure bill. There's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve bill. And there is going to be a stablecoin bill. And it is really important for you to understand this, because if you are not to sell your Bitcoin and you want to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and you are risk managing, then you need to engage in the fiat currency proof of weapons network, but you need to do it in the right way. And we created from our sector these things called stable coins. And I wrote a book in 2011 about how we would transition to a central bank digital currency as a tool and weapon, and how that transition would make. But it is becoming very, very clear that the US is slowly but surely transitioning to a stablecoin standard as it runs this two-tiered Federal Reserve system and technocratic stablecoin standard to come. And the regulations of how oppressive, how freedom orientated, and how decentralized those stablecoins will be is going to be written. And I hope that the countries that put more freedom into those stablecoins are going to be the ones that end up as the world reserve currencies. We'll be going through that anyway. Just before we go into that, a few other countries. Remember, Bitcoin is not just a US story. The reason it becomes a US story is because the Federal Reserve managed to create the debt-based slavery system of the US dollar world reserve currency after the World War II Bretton Woods system, in which after the 1913 Federal Reserve System co-opted America and constructed the dollar to get the world into debt slavery and to bankrupt the US government by fighting war after war after war and export that globally through the International Monetary Fund. I'm going to be going through the proof of weapons network in full in part 2. But around the world, those victims of the Federal Reserve System, those when the Federal Reserve creates 9% inflation, end up in Zimbabwe with 900% inflation, are able to fight back and either allow their people to fight back or construct a financial system that allows the country to fight back as well. And so one victim of the proof of weapons network is, of course, Pakistan, who announced that they're looking to legalize Bitcoin and crypto. And that was an announcement from the Pakistan Crypto Council CEO. And so we welcome such news in every single country as the global south unifies and we have self-sovereign nations, self-sovereign individuals, and self-sovereign companies that cannot be that can fight back against the proof of weapons network. Meanwhile, in the US, the crypto saw David Sachs, whose job is to asset strip America and turn it over to the technocrats through artificial intelligence on centralized databases and ushering in a crypto fiat money printing side at the same time as benefiting from the Bitcoin strategic reserves. Well, David Sachs came out and said that he has held talks with the top UAE officials in order to discuss cryptocurrency. And we know that the UAE has been working on their regulations, attracting businesses, creating a tax-neutral environment. And last week, I discussed the significance of the sovereign wealth fund of the UAE of Abu Dhabi investing $2 billion in Bitcoin. The TLDR was that they are looking at a capital markets play in a tax-neutral jurisdiction using a stablecoin standard and utilizing the 260 million users at Binance, is my speculation, in order to build a tokenized global exchange that can suck capital markets into the middle and sit between China and America as they go through this AI race in order to control and weaponize all the data on their servers when they move to these stablecoin standards. Speaking of stablecoins, in 2016, you'll know that I was part of restructuring Bitfinex, a hacked exchange that had 119,000 Bitcoin stolen from it. And the victims of that were able to get shares in the company, and I became a shareholder in the company. It's the partner company to Tether. They launched stablecoins, which is now the 7th largest buyer of US dollar treasuries relative to countries. That is how big the stablecoin standard is. Now, the government is looking back and saying, we're able to use our bank network of fiat currency proof of weapons network, and they're able to use all sorts of tools at the Federal Reserve level in order to get the government into debt. And then the private banks get to benefit from creating the dollar every time they issue a loan. And the credit-based banking system is a Ponzi scheme that guarantees that more debt will be issued in the future, benefiting the system that was set up by the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And that is the private banks and commercial banks that get to create the dollar and all the fiat currencies that are connected to the proof of weapons network that we'll be covering in number 2. Now, stablecoins came along and said, we can build assets on top of Bitcoin. The first one was on Omni, which was a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin. We now have layer 2s like Lightning Network, which have private transactions in channels and instant transactions a lot cheaper because Omni was damn expensive because of the way it was built and structured. So eventually those stable coins ended up going on Ethereum. Ethereum transitioned from proof of work to proof of stake. Now those that own the stakes control the network. And then it started going further and further down the line when people would create more centralized databases that were called blockchains that were, pre-mined fiat currency tokens. And the more centralized you get, if you have a federated network of a few nodes run by the very same creators of those coins, you can make really fast, cheaper, faster, and what they call better transactions if you give up, and eventually you just end up as a database like the PayPal Mafia, where you put it on Amazon Web Service and there's no blockchain needed if you want to get really cheap. But That has been the history of our industry as people launch cheaper, faster, better, but more centralized networks. And so we ended up further and further down that network, and then the stable coins would go further and further down the different chains. And now as the US government gets into stablecoin standards, they've got all of the crypto lobbies that pre-mined those coins, like Ripple Labs and various other companies. I've disclosed that I'm a shareholder in Circle, Bitfinex, which is the sister company for Tether, and many, many years ago invested in Ripple Labs, which owns like 50% of the XRP tokens. Not excited about the mission, but I was investing in that because it was plugging together like BitPesa, which was bringing Bitcoin to Africa, or UnoCoin that was bringing Bitcoin to India, invested in BitPesa, UnoCoin, Bitso that was bringing Bitcoin to Mexico, and ATM that was bringing Bitcoin to Argentina and Venezuela. And so the pitch was that it could connect all these different networks. Didn't quite work out that way. But anyway, nonetheless, now we've got a global competition for those that are using their pre-mined coins to bribe politicians in the crypto lobby to make sure they get a piece of the future of the stablecoin standard of the dollar. Now that the Trump administration has said they want to be, through David Sachs' crypto SAR, the center of crypto, and they want to be the center for Bitcoin as well. Now, just to give you an idea of size, in terms of purchases of US treasuries, which is US debt, it is only the UK, Singapore, which has vast reserves, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and the Cayman Islands, which is the largest purchaser of US treasuries. It is only them that is larger than Tether in terms of their foreign country purchases. Now, the largest purchasers are like the BlackRocks and the hedge funds and the mutual funds and the pension funds within America. But in terms of countries, Tether is now number 7. It is larger than Canada, which is going through a trade war with America, Taiwan, which is a weapon of the proof of weapons network in order to try and escalate a NATO expansion to try and push China into reunifying if they ever want to de-topple because they control the semiconductor chips. Mexico, where China has factories and is the largest manufacturer and the exporter to America that is engaged in a trade war right now. Norway, which above the northern side of the Baltics of Europe, is the largest exporter of oil and natural gas across the European regions. Hong Kong, which was a victim of the proof of weapons network when China was suffering from a British opium war, and they negotiated a 99-year lease in order to give that region to the Brits, and then China wanted to reunify. And also South Korea, which was a victim of the proof of weapons network when there was a Cold War that was artificially created between the Federal Reserve and the Soviet Union. And therefore, they engaged in getting the US government deeper into debt by wiping out Korea and splitting it into two. And now you have a pariah state because it had nuclear weapons to defend itself from the proof of weapons network. And South Korea, which is a conduit to the Federal Reserve System. And Germany, which was also split in two after the World War II. And then had this ideological battle between communism and capitalism in order to fund both sides of the war to get the US government deeper into debt. And it was recently weaponized by the European Union and the European Central Bank and the CIA that blew up Nord Stream pipeline, escalated a NATO war to ensure that Russia was weakened and Europe was destroyed and put in recession. And Germany and, of course, Saudi Arabia, which was weaponized and colonized from Sykes-Picot. And Sykes-Picot was a mechanism for ensuring that all oil is priced in dollars. And the Middle East is always destabilized by a CIA, Mossad, and MI6 operation called Israel that we'll be covering in the geopolitical section in order to make sure that the US government goes deeper and deeper into debt. And the demand for dollars is exported globally, as we'll cover in the proof of weapons network. All of those are, and of course, Switzerland, which is where the Bank for International Settlements was set up to create a network of 157 central banks in order to weaponize the dollar after the European Central Bank took over the European countries, took away their self-sovereignty, and create a neutral jurisdiction for banksters in order to be able to siphon off and have a privacy environment for their crimes. All of those are now smaller than Tether in terms of the amount of treasuries that they purchase. And so that is absolutely fascinating. And in fact, with the resistance movement against the dollar through de-dollarization, because too much settler colonialism and too much violence and covert regime changes has happened, they are using the fact that they are selling treasuries in order to re-collaborate the power so that we can move to more harmonious and peaceful environment. And the sellers of treasuries after Tether and after those countries is India, a member of BRICS, Ireland, which recently moved the Trump administration because they created a tax neutral jurisdiction so that companies and technocrats like Apple and Google can set up there, siphon off all the tax into Ireland so that they don't have to pay any tax in America, and all of the big pharma companies as well, in order to take advantage of that jurisdiction, again, which had a resistance movement against England with the IRS and various other things. And also Brazil, which is a member, the B in BRICS, they're all net selling. Japan, now that's a really interesting one. Japan was obviously colonized after World War II, and the Bank of Japan became a mechanism for creating rampant inflation across the Japanese people, and then creating a central bank that would issue money debt-free, and then they could use that in order to borrow and then purchase assets in order to siphon off the wealth and create one of the largest welfare states. And thankfully, many of the Japanese people were able to invest to protect themselves from it. And of course, China, which was the rising power that transitioned, they created the PBOC and they created a state banking system similar to what Germany created before they arrested the Rothschild pre-World War II, and then created a debt-free monetary system. But obviously, China had a hybrid CCP communist model that then created a state banking system. And because they had the ability to weaken the currency, and now they got $1 trillion surplus at the expense of America that was consuming on debt by the proof of weapons network, encouraging debt, where everybody is borrowing on credit cards and paying exorbitant interest rates. And that consumption led to a massive trade deficit that is imploding on itself in America right now as America tries to figure out what to do next. And China is selling those treasuries because Russia was weaponized by holding treasuries and holding funds in a European bank. And that 350 billion was just confiscated from it when the CIA escalated a NATO expansion in order to take down Europe and weaken Russia for the profits of the military-industrial complex. Well, all of those are now net sellers of treasuries. So who are they going to sell those treasuries to? Of course, they are deconstructing in a controlled demolition the Federal Reserve System to a stablecoin standard. And why were no banksters sat around Trump in his inauguration 2 months ago? Because the technocrats were sat there, the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezoses. This is their gift to asset strip America and hand it over to the technology companies that are going to be the stablecoin issuers. And that's why Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, I think, or the head of commerce, who is responsible for managing the custody of the treasuries for Tether, made sure that Tether is in that lobby group, as well as Circle and various other things, because the only way to be a part of the American system is to buy the prostitutes and politicians that run the fake democracies and make you think that they're doing things in your favor. And at the same time, North Korea, the pariah state that has been sanctioned out of existence, ended up with a nuclear weapon, and they end up creating Lazarus Group in order to create hacking networks. North Korea has now joined the strategic Bitcoin reserve family because allegedly they hacked a bunch of Ethereum out of the Bybit hack, and it ended up being converted into Bitcoin through the network. And now you can trace those wallet addresses. And from the Chainalysis, you can see that North Korea now owns 13,562 Bitcoin. And so while the US is building its Bitcoin strategic reserve, and it is deciding what regulations it's going to have for its stablecoin standard, everyone is flurrying around to be the stablecoin issuers. PayPal launched its own stablecoin. X and Elon Musk has been applying for their money transmitters. My prediction is they're going to be launching a stablecoin. And of course, President Trump himself launched his own stablecoin through World Liberty Financial because he is making sure he gets his cut of issuing the dollar via stablecoins in the future, as America is asset stripped while it contracts to a regional power because essentially, we'll cover more in the geopolitical section, a new world order has been set that I've covered in previous episodes, but because in 2008, Bitcoin created a resistance, they couldn't defeat us, and we ended up creating a way to own your own money, spend your own money, and defeat the Federal Reserve System. So all they could do through Operation Choke Point 2.0 is the Federal Reserve would harness Gary Gensler at the SEC and use the corrupt network and political lobbying through Elizabeth Warren in order to take out our system, implant people like SBF, the only person that was able to get a meeting with Gary Gensler, and wipe out the system, wipe out the three banks that were serving the crypto exchange, Silvergate, Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature, and then hand over the industry and say, SEC, approve custody for Bank of New York Mellon, approve ETFs, so that everyone can own their Bitcoin through BlackRock. And now BlackRock and everybody wants you to custody with them and hand your Bitcoin over to them so that you cannot peacefully resist against it, but at least you get to benefit from, hopefully, the 4-year cycle and the construct of it. But anyway, America is now transitioning to this stablecoin standard. It is a slow demolition. Create the regulatory environment, create a fight with the Federal Reserve, and allow all of those treasuries that the rest of the world is selling and create new demand by backing those stable coins. And guess what I think you should be doing? We should be creating stable coins, firstly, decentralized on top of Lightning Network, various other channels, so there's got a bit more privacy. And hopefully the mechanism for allowing that to happen is still there, because the technocrats want to control your stable coins, and they'll use things like, the Patriot Act, the Bank Secrecy Act, in order to, because everyone has to, if you are a registered company, you have to comply with those regulations in order to get between you and your money. And what is the mechanism for doing that in the future? Of course, it's artificial intelligence. So there is a race globally to acquire those treasuries, issue those stable coins, and build the network that's required in order to control all your data through artificial intelligence in a centralized hub and honeypot, which is why companies like NVIDIA are providing all of that infrastructure because they want you to have all of that data in possession of the technocrats that have been chosen by the military-industrial complex to control the new financial system as we control demolition, the Federal Reserve Act, and we have that battle because it's no longer working. And, this is exactly what happened during World War I, when the Bank of England destroyed the British economy, got it deep and deeper into debt, pushed it into all of these colonial wars. It made so many enemies when it controlled about 60% of the world through colonialism. We were justified in being told that we're working for God and we need to civilize people. Anyone recognize what's happening today? And therefore, all of the banks were able to take over the pound, fund it through excessive wartime debt, bankrupt the UK government, and then finally do a controlled demolition of the system and hand it over to America, when the very same people behind the Bank of England created the Federal Reserve. They then did a revolution in Russia, installed communism into the Soviet Union, and then funded both sides of the Cold War and benefited from World War I and World War II in order to weaponize the dollar to ensure that everybody is in the debt-based Ponzi scheme. So what is happening on the European Union side? Well, you got your stablecoin technocratic artificial intelligence transition away from the Federal Reserve System in America, where Trump, Elon Musk, and the PayPal mafia and Peter Thiel are going to be the future controllers of those financial systems. And as the world sells their treasuries and then sells it to American people and backs it by stable coins, in the European Union, because we had a Fed first policy and the European Central Bank using the European Union in order to take over the sovereignty of all of the European countries and just take these shell companies, these shell countries like Spain, like Italy, like Germany, and then use financial warfare from the proof of weapons network to put Europe into a recession. And then they have the solution, the digital dollar. So in the European Union, we are picking up the war machine as Zelensky was a CIA implant in order to transition the CIA war over to the MI6 and European central banksters war. And we are being told, because we're going to war with Russia, because of course Russia is Hitler, and we need to fight Hitler because Hitler's going to take over the whole of Europe and the boogie monster is going to take it down. Meanwhile, we're deep in recession. UK is a shell company for the military industrial complex. Big Pharma has been asset stripped of everything. UK people are choosing between eating and heating. Germany no longer gets access to its cheap gas, and we'll cover it in the geopolitical section. Guess what? Suddenly, a new pipeline got blown up this week. We'll cover more in part 3. So, of course, the solution is going to be fed to us as the beta test. It was beta tested on China with the issuance of the Chinese central bank digital currency. And now it's being ready to roll out in Europe on October 2025. The EU is officially going to be moving to the digital dollar, both retail and wholesale, central bank digital currency standard. And the only way that you can get independence from both the US technocratic asset stripping to the wealthy, or the centralization effect of handing over the entire European economy to the ECB and the European Central Bank, is build your independence with Bitcoin strategic reserve. So if you are fortunate enough to be able to beat the proof of weapons network and actually vote for a democratically elected politician that is actually representing the interest of their country, they will be building their Bitcoin strategic reserves. But because that may not happen, you need to build your Bitcoin strategic reserves, and your company needs to build this Bitcoin treasury strategy so that you can be sovereign and independent as the European Central Bank wipes out the middle class and puts them on a universal basic income as you go to war with Russia in a war that you certainly can't win. And the military industrial complex will sacrifice people and profit from the whole thing, of course. So everybody needs to build their Bitcoin reserves, because handing over the entire euro to the European Central Bank is even worse than having the banks create the digital euro every time they issue a loan, because at least it will be stable, but it will be authoritarianism. And you need decentralization in order to fight back and resist. At the same time, while we've got these two-tiered models, we've got the stablecoin technocratic standard in America, and we've got the European Union CBDC through the ECB. We're going to build a massive surveillance state. UK was the beta test. The rebuild in Gaza will be a smart city controlled by artificial intelligence military industrial complex that will come across to these states. And of course, you need a boogie monster like the fake war on terror 2.0 in order to make you believe that you're under attack and you should stay at home from any in case, and maybe even inject yourself if they can get away with that one again, or maybe they wipe out the internet to try and make you stay at home as well. Anyway, if we have Bitcoin, we are protected. We have money we can own, money that has a fixed supply, that beats the Federal Reserve System and the proof of weapons network, and money that we can transport globally around the world. So what is the Middle East doing? Well, the Middle East is saying, right, Europe, if you're going to be a bitch to the European Central Bank, and America, you're going to be a bitch to the PayPal mafia and technocrats. And China, you're going to carry on doing what you've done, but your population's kind of okay with it. Americans think that they've got, they're able to fight back against it. And Europeans have just submitted through debt slavery. We're going to build in the Middle East a tokenized system to have a tax neutral jurisdiction powered by the natural gas plugged into Bitcoin proof of work and transition into sitting in the middle of the world with capital markets, stable coins, Bitcoin standards between the two largest nations, the consuming nation, America, and the producing nation, China. And that is where I think the Middle East is going to be going. And that's why they're doing their tokenized capital markets. But I guarantee you, I have got no proof of this, but I guarantee you that those energy countries in the Middle East are mining the Bitcoin right now, building their reserves without actually telling you. And they will be working on, they've already got their regulations for stable coins, and they can plug into CBDCs, stable coins, tokenized securities, Bitcoin, the proof of stake networks. They'll be plugging the whole damn thing together because the global South, BRICS, is also aligned with the Middle Eastern vision. Saudi Arabia is kind of sitting in the middle between the stablecoin standard and the BRICS standard because it's deconstructing the petrodollar. Remember, Saudi Arabia is a net seller of treasuries now. It still prices some of its oil in dollars, but it started pricing it in the Chinese currency and Russian currency. And it wants to use its vast oil supplies in order to determine whether you have inflation or whether you have deflation at the whim of the kingdom and the one ruler and the family that rules it as well. And so BRICS is, what are they doing? They're going to be providing the back end, into all of this, the roadmap for transitioning to an artificial intelligence world. It requires the energy. It requires the rare earth minerals to construct semiconductor chips. It requires Taiwan to produce the semiconductor chips, which will then be diversified across America and China as well for strategic reasons, because that is also needed for drones and AI warfare and F-35 fighter jets and various other things. It also needs the steel and aluminum for the manufacturing base. It also needs the ASICs and the data centers and the servers. And it needs the technology and the electricity and energy that powers it as we transition to this fully digitized world. And of course, BRICS are going to be the cheap labor that produces it. And if America is becoming a regional power and Europe is going into recession for America, then all of the colonialism and the destruction across Africa, stealing all of those rare earth minerals, perhaps they can be built up and they can become rising. We're back now. Okay, awesome. So I was talking about the largest countries and their strategic reserves at the moment. Now, America said that it's the largest because it's got 220,000, but the Trump administration is saying you now need to audit that. When you audit it, you'll realize that there is a Department of Justice order to send 96,000 Bitcoin back to Bitfinex. I know that because I'm a shareholder in Bitfinex. And so that will push America further down, which means that they need Cynthia Lummis's bill in order to be a leader. And I'll go through a couple of the other strategies that America is using in order to take over China, because right now China has the largest reserves when you remove that 96,000 Bitcoin that's owed to the Bitfinex shareholders. And so China owns approximately 11% of the hash power. That's not a perfect tool, but actually I think it went up to about 21%. 11% was Russia, 21% was China. They used to own about 60% before they had bad regulations. And then America ended up with 40% of the hash power. But the point is, it is geographically diversified around nations that are natural enemies to each other, but need to trade with each other if we end up America transitioning to a regional power and BRICS being able to stop all the covert regime changes and rise up because their assets and rare earth minerals are no longer a victim of the proof of weapons network. And we can have a genuine fourth turning, let's call it, an area of prosperity, as long as World War III doesn't happen. And so China is the largest holder of Bitcoin, an authoritarian regime, but it's not levered up with mass debt because it has a non-debt-based financial system, but it has regional capitalism. And as soon as a company gets big enough, they end up being acquired by the CCP, versus the American model, which is where all of the assets are being stripped over to the billionaires and they're bigger than the government. And when we cover the proof of weapons network, how the mafia and the mob are able to infiltrate both the technocrats and the government to own the government and make you think you've got a democracy when they fight you between left and right. Two different systems, but Bitcoin's obviously the one that we play in because we got the resistance. And so anyway, there's going to be multiple stable coins plugged into central bank digital currencies, plugged into artificial intelligence as we make this transition. And how is America going to build its strategic reserves? Well, remember what was said. I covered this, I think, 2 episodes ago when I went through the revenue neutral Bitcoin strategic reserve in America. It essentially means as long as taxpayers are not paying for the Bitcoin, they can use their strategic reserves and recollaborate them, like they could reprice gold because it's gone past $3,000. And then they could use that in order to sell some of the gold and purchase Bitcoin, which is a much bigger budget than if you just went for taxpayers paying for it. But also you could do things like nationalize a new company that what used to be called MicroStrategy into Strategy. And I believe Strategy, which was founded in the dot-com boom and bust and was intelligence data, is more than likely to be the type of company that is connected to government intelligence because Google is. You know, we know from Edward Snowden that they were just mechanisms for creating backdoors, and then the military-industrial complex would give the technology to those in the proof of weapons network to become mega billionaires, create trillion-dollar companies, and then bribe politicians to change all the laws inside of the proof of weapons network. You know, all of the companies, I mean, Elon Musk got more military-industrial complex technology handed to him with government contracts to develop it, which has made him the richest person in America, at least. They say the world, but I think the real wealth is not declared. And we'll cover more of that on the proof of weapons network as well. But MicroStrategy to me is highly likely to be intelligence connected at this stage because Michael Saylor was propelled, just like SBF was propelled. And I'm not making a comparison that they're fraud. This is all done via a public company. However, they are using more and more dubious mechanisms for asset stripping fiat currency away from Americans over to a Bitcoin standard within the treasury, so that eventually it went from 0 Bitcoin to almost 500,000 Bitcoin, half the amount of Bitcoin that Satoshi Nakamoto mined in the early days through those wallets. And now it is a strategic asset of intelligence and the proof of weapons network. And so it is literally asset stripping the dollar system to accumulate Bitcoin from debt-based slavery. And anyone that wants to be a part of that is buying these different products on the public market. It's got a lot of leverage, but then you can do exactly what has been done in the past. You create artificial constructs like long-term capital management. You create a black box hedge fund. This is a different version. This is a transparent, financialized US dollar weapon, which then, when you want to, you can use interest rates to blow up the company if you choose, and then implement a government bailout like what happened with long-term capital management, and print a stable coin, and they'll pick the issuer. Will it be Trump's World Liberty Financial? Will it be X or Elon Musk with X Financial? Will it be the PayPal mafia? Or will they all get their cut depending upon how many treasuries they agree to purchase in this technocratic system that they're all vying for right now? And then you can nationalize it, swap out the Bitcoin for some stable coins, And hopefully you're smart enough, if you get caught in that, to take your stable coins and not give it to BlackRock to earn your Bitcoin, but buy some Bitcoin for yourself when the government wipes out whatever MicroStrategy can handle. And the Federal Reserve could be this very system where they use rates in order to create pump and dumps like they have 20 times since 1913 that leads to bailout, where the rich get richer at the expense through inflation of middle-class America, who get poorer and poorer and poorer because they created a debt-based Ponzi scheme, too big to fail financial system that is about asset stripping wealth now that the Federal Reserve took over constitutional America and the dollar. And so I believe that strategy is using the constructs of the globalized capital markets in order to acquire as much Bitcoin. And they're probably trying to get all of the Bitcoin in a revenue neutral strategy so that when the Fed is weaponized to hand over the system to the technocrats based upon whatever they want to do that, they've set up the regulations, they've handed over the key players, and then they can wipe out MicroStrategy, crash the markets, and use those leverage systems in order to nationalize strategy. And if they want to do that, they could also do that with the Bitcoin in custody, similar to how they did with gold in 1933, because those that were trying to protect their pension and gave up control of Bitcoin to BlackRock in custody, hopefully you'll get a good price at that time, and then you'll use it in order to convert that stablecoin to Bitcoin and own it in self-custody with money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply as well. Those are the strategies that can be used in order to do it revenue neutral. The other thing you could do is you could use proof of stake. Proof of stake means that whoever owns the ETH controls the network. You control the governance. And so all of the stablecoin issuers that own ETH right now are now applying in order to be able to stake the ETH in their ETH ETF. And ETH has underperformed Bitcoin to strategically acquire chunks of Ethereum, because then they can own more and more chunks of that and build their stablecoin standard on top of that chain as well, which is what Trump's family is doing with World Liberty Financial. And so those that control the stakes control the networks of the pre-mined alternatives to Bitcoin proof of work. These are the types of mechanisms that can be used in order to get that Bitcoin strategic reserves in a revenue neutral way if America suddenly wants to become the largest holder of Bitcoin. But there is a very important part to this. So what is strategy doing? They launched what they're calling they were talking about a Bitcoin convertible bond ETF. So what that means is that any company using the strategy, Bitcoin treasury strategy, like Riot and Marathon, they're packaged up into another financialized ETF, which is a Bitcoin convertible note ETF, which allows retail people to get exposure to the more market neutral ways of getting exposure to Bitcoin. Now, let's not forget, if you transition to a stablecoin standard, eventually it won't be like Tether, where Tether gives you a stablecoin and then they buy treasuries and they get free Bitcoin by taking the yield on those treasuries and buying Bitcoin, and they become a bigger financial institution than the profits of BlackRock and Citibank by doing that. As we compete, people are creating stable coins where they share the yield with you, and eventually that yield can be used in order to acquire Bitcoin. So you can have fiat currency that is converted to a stable coin that will then pay the yield from the proof of weapons network, and that can be converted into peaceful proof of work on Bitcoin. And so you can do the market neutral strategy. You can earn with your spending money fiat currency that is being used in order to kick off free Bitcoin. That's the type of innovation that we can have as we transition to this. And that's the tool that can be used to slowly control demolition, the Federal Reserve and the fractional banking system over time. This gives you some upside of Bitcoin, but it allows you to maintain your purchasing power. And that's what Michael Saylor was doing with these different types of convertible. They were basically taking all of the money that you're pooling together in your pension and taking more conservative fixed income investors, giving them some exposure to Bitcoin without having to speculate on Bitcoin itself. And now they're being packaged into an ETF, and it's another product. Look, just understand that it's about risk management and putting together a decent strategy. That's what I've always been doing. And I'll be on simondixon.com. If you're a member of my Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free, I'll make sure I'm going to be releasing comprehensive guides on exactly how I do it so that you can decide to develop your own strategy in your own circumstance. But it's about understanding the different rules of the game in order to carefully transition this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. Anyway, so we've got this new ETF products that is allowing people to use the dollar system to get exposure to Bitcoin, get some of the upside, but be protected from the downside. And now they're taking those strategy, Marathon, which is a Bitcoin miner, a public Bitcoin miner, Riot, which is a public Bitcoin miner, and then packaging them up into the companies that issue these converts. And now you have an ETF. So this is what I'm talking about with the globalized, financialized. And obviously in Abu Dhabi, they want to tokenize that thing. And BlackRock is looking at launching their tokenized exchange as well as they tokenize this whole thing and transition to a globalized proof of weapons network that allow people to transition into peaceful proof of work as well. But with them in the middle, of course, which hopefully you're smarter than that and you manage that risk as well. But what is the point of this product? Well, this product gives retail access to what was only available to the rich and wealthy. And the only reason that they're rich and wealthy is because you're handing your money over to BlackRock, and BlackRock is charging a fee, and then they get to control of your assets from all of the pension, endowment funds, insurance, and various other things. Okay, so what else is Strategy doing? Not only are they creating these financialized ETFs, they're also launching an announcement that came this week of a perpetual 10% dividend. What are they calling it? Basically, what it is a product where they're doing a fundraise and they're going to pay you a perpetual 10% dividend. This is slowly creeping the risk curve. So if ever the Fed wants to do a controlled demolition in order to nationalize this, then they can do that at the moment that they want to do that. Because now Strategy needs to pay a fiat currency dollar dividend 10% in dollars. And so if Bitcoin crashes, which quite frequently it does, they still have dollar liability. So they may need to sell some of that Bitcoin to pay the dividend. And it's a perpetual dividend that has to be paid forever. And so now they're doing dollar liability on top of all the other products. You got to figure out where you are in the cap table, because if that ever ends up in Chapter 11 and nationalization, you got to find out, am I provide the convertible note holders? Am I an equity holder? Am I a debt holder? Am I a preference share? Am I common share? You better be sophisticated in your understanding of analyzing cap tables, because those who are on the wrong side of FTX and Celsius know what that means when customers and shareholders are put in different things. Anyway, be careful with these tools. They're being constructed in order to have financial weapons of mass destruction for whenever they are needed in order to service this transition from a proof of weapons network to peaceful proof of work, where the financial system is trying to get you to hold your Bitcoin with them. Why? Because fortunately, proof of work, it doesn't matter who owns it. And that's why it's better than proof of stake. Because even though they play all of these games, you still get to opt out. You still get to own your own money. You still get to do things, you get to spend your own money, and you still get to benefit from fixed digital hard money as the fiat currency proof of weapons network deploys itself, because it's creating products like this, which take it to next level risk. This is starting to resemble a shell company like Long-Term Capital Management, different version, because that was a black box hedge fund, but it can go through a controlled demolition by manipulating interest rates and creating crashes of markets as they choose. And then it can be nationalized at the right moment, as I said. So this is why I believe strategy at this point is an asset. So benefit from it, understand it, but don't get caught on the wrong side of it. And for clarity, this does not change any of my thesis around Bitcoin, because Satoshi Nakamoto knew that the key to proof of work was to create a game theory situation where countries start allocating their resources to hash power, and you have competing countries that are able to mine Bitcoin to repurpose electricity and back the intrinsic value of the proof of weapons network, and unwind it to the proof of work network as more and more energy is transitioned into Bitcoin. So let's do a quick review on where we're at with that hash power. Hash power now controls basically the production line that we're talking about, and I covered it earlier. You got to have natural gas, which is the input to electricity. So whoever has the natural gas routes, which is why we're fighting wars over natural gas routes, is going to be able to plug those into rare earth minerals that are repurposed into semiconductor chips that are then plugged into hardware, ASICs, that are then hosted in data centers that can access those cheap electricity, that is then run by robotics and artificial intelligence in order to provide and generate Bitcoin through the proof of work network. Now, here's the important part about it. Because that network exists where people are contributing and going through that cycle in China, in America, in Central America, in South America, in Europe, in Africa, across the global South, across the BRICS nations, in the Middle East, even in the farthest parts of energy producing regions in Canada, wherever it may be, because this is a global pay in Mexico, because this is a completely global pay, it means no government can take down the Bitcoin proof of work network, which means that as long as that is geographically diversified around countries that hate each other, it can create an equilibrium and the backbone of all of these different financialized systems as fiat currency implodes in itself because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Now, what do we know about this? Once you've got this hash power, this global decentralized network, the central bank couldn't take down Bitcoin. The governments couldn't take down Bitcoin. The banks couldn't take down Bitcoin. And so because of that, we have decentralized money that is completely different from anything else out there that doesn't have this vast system. Now what we need to do is replicate what we did for Bitcoin on the proof of work network. We need stable coins that are decentralized by nature, allowing you to lock up your Bitcoin in a Bitcoin-based smart contract in a channel through a Lightning network, where you can use fiat currency rails in order to manage in the transition, and it can be done in a decentralized way so that eventually artificial intelligence will choose the currency of freedom over the European currency of suppression or the technocratic currency of America. We also need decentralized identity. We need to make sure that we can do this on chain, not have it where it's all controlled within a honeypot of data in either China or America. We also need to do this with our social media communications, because we know at the moment on X, we're given freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Freedom of reach will be given to those that have say the right thing, do the right thing, engage in degeneracy, which gets more engagement, has a high social credit score based upon what the technocrats for commercial corporate interest say you should be doing. And if you resist against it, then you will get a lower social credit score when Elon launches his stablecoin based upon all the data that it's getting from Doge as it audits the Pentagon, audits the Fed, audits Treasury, audits the Department of Education, and then uses X in order to regime change and persuade India to make India great again and hand over all their data, and Europe to hand over all their data through Make Europe Great Again as we get this CBDC. And then you'll be used as a tool in order to manufacture consent to handing over all your data, all your social media, so that then they can use that to power all of the big data through the compute network that they're building. And we need to do the same, but decentralized. We need that proof of work network through the constructs of layer twos to do social media, to do identity, to do stable coins, and most importantly, decentralize artificial intelligence so that we can actually get the truth rather than the China propagandized AI and the America propagandized AI. On the two wars, remember, before, when the Rothschilds pushed the world into World War I, they funded both the Federal Reserve through the network of the Bank of England, we'll cover more in the macro section, and they funded the Soviet Union by taking over Russia and installing communism. Today, the same networks are controlling the mechanisms behind the centralized networks for the technocratic Stablecoin Standard and the central bank proof of weapons network, EU CBDC standard. It's the same battle, an ideological battle to divide and conquer and weaponize for the benefit of those that control the proof of weapons network as it transitions from the old system to the new system that we have been covered. And remember what they use those fiat currency rails to do. The central banks use their fiat currency proof of weapons rails in order to acquire gold. Most of the gold, the reason gold is hitting new all-time highs, it's in Switzerland, it's in Singapore, it's in the coffers of the central banks. It was in the Bank of England. It's now meant to be in Fort Knox. And it looks like that's going to be audited because the Federal Reserve may have created paper claims against it in order to collateralize what it confiscated from the Americans in 1933 to fund the wars that it created, to fund the debt slavery, $37 trillion of debt slavery with $250 trillion of additional liability for the welfare system of Medicare, the welfare system of Social Security, the interest on the debt that serves the bank lobby, and the war machine that weaponizes the central banks and intelligence agencies in order to create the death and destruction that is required, and the control of media and psyops that makes you think that what you see on the news is the truth to cover up for their crimes. We'll cover more of that. But what do the central banks do? They print the fiat currency and they don't store it. They store gold. So the fiat currency system has centralized gold in the coffers of the Ponzi scheme money creators, and some of it might be left for the rest of us, but because it increases at 2% per annum. And if you're a country like El Salvador that allegedly is sat on $3 trillion of unexplored gold, which can boost the supply, of course, the IMF comes along and said, please take some dollars instead, borrow it from us. And by the way, don't buy Bitcoin. We don't want you to be free. And don't borrow anything from China that may want to rebuild you through the Belt and Road Initiative. We want you to be in debt-based slavery to the International Monetary Fund. And we definitely don't want you exploring that gold because we want to take over your gold and you not have Bitcoin to free yourself. And therefore, we will not give you another IMF loan until you stop buying Bitcoin. It is financialized weapons of mass destruction designed to prop up power and control in order to take away sovereignty from nations to prop up the dollar in the land of the free, to export that globally and use that money in order to topple governments and create death and destruction globally in the proof of weapons network. And what do they need? They need data centralization. They need stablecoin centralization. In the digital era, it is about who controls the data and who has access to the data. The whole economy is being recollaborated around data. This is why nothing compares to Bitcoin when you understand how the stablecoin standard and the CBDC standard, the fake war of the two ideologies of the same, control mechanism. Right now, when everyone tries to push you into a psyop of saying, but Bitcoin proof of work, we also have other proof of work chains. Bitcoin's not unique. Peter Schiff, if you haven't seen my debate with Peter Schiff, it's his old tactic. He thinks Bitcoin proof of work is the same as all the other proof of work chains. Let me put that to bed right now and understand how you are alive at one of the most unique times in financial history. And if you are being fooled by useful idiots like Peter Schiff to not have any Bitcoin, and that has cost fortunes to people because of his message, understand that right now Bitcoin has 800 exahashes per second of power behind it. That means every second Bitcoin is solving 800 quadrillion math problems that, in order to execute a 50% attack, is both geographically, strategically impossible and would require trillions of dollars that would destroy a fiat currency in order to try and execute such an attack, let alone the geographical and impossibility of bombing server farms in countries that hate each other that would lead to World War III and would be impossible and fail. There is no network like that. This is the first time in human history that we have digitized the mechanism of debt-free hard money on the largest network of distributed supercomputers the world has ever seen. What is the second largest network to that? Well, if you take the largest, let's look at a fork of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash has 3.83 exahashes per second. And I can name on one hand the very people, and I won't name them, that are actually mining it. They control the whole network. And if you wanted to wipe out Bitcoin Cash, you are one building away from doing that. That's why it's already had 50% attacks. But they want you to think that it's about cheaper, faster, better transaction. It's not about decentralization. They don't want you to think that. They want you to think it's a meme coin like Dogecoin. So how much hash power does Dogecoin have? It has 0.002 exahashes per second. What about silver to Bitcoin's gold? What about Litecoin? Litecoin has approximately 0.0012 exahashes per second. All of them are capable of being 51% attacked. And if it was worth it, a fiat currency could be printed in order to attack those vectors. There is no other Bitcoin. Understand it. What about Ethereum, which used to be proof of work, and then it transitioned to proof of stake? But in that transition, when it tried to bail out through DAO, some people that printed a decentralized VC fund called DAO, the DAO, and they tried to bail out the Ethereum Foundation people that invested in it, they reversed the chain, and then the old chain remained as proof of work, which is Ethereum Classic. Ethereum Classic has 0.00030,553 exahashes per second. It's already been 51% attack. What about the privacy coin? We're told that if you want to engage in privacy, then Monero is proof of work as well. Well, Monero has approximately 0.0000004 exahashes per second behind that network. Bitcoin is the world's, let's compare it to the world's largest supercomputer. The world's largest supercomputer is called Frontier, requires military industrial Federal Reserve type of money printing and control of a government network to create it. It has one exaflop, one exaflop per second. So that is the equivalent, and it's not quite a comparison because Bitcoin is decentralized, but it's 800 times less powerful. The largest supercomputer in the world that governments can produce is 800 times less powerful than Bitcoin. And we're not even getting started yet. The Bitcoin hash power is up and to the right as there is a security arms race to own Bitcoin hash power to protect your country in the future if it becomes the backbone of the clearing between these different networks. Bitcoin is built differently. It is not the same. Don't let idiots fool you because they want to part you from your Bitcoin in order to invest in their pump and dump. It is built differently. We need everything to be built on top of this distributed, world's largest distributed supercomputer with open source code that anybody can audit, and a decentralized network of nodes that can hold the -2 account, as we saw during the Bitcoin hash war, and as we will probably see when we transition the code to quantum resistant cryptography, which is a battle that we will have to fight in the future, which is why Bitcoin is so different as well. Bitcoin proof of work built with a layer 2 lightning channels that have enhanced privacy, enhanced stable coins, and even if a government wants to, CBDCs, because if it creates a CBDC with the most amount of freedom, it can compete. David can beat Goliath. It can be the next world reserve currency based upon freedom and decentralization. It's a speculative attack on the central bank digital currency, death, destruction, and violence of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And of course, the shitcoin lobby are all sitting around in order to buy Donald Trump and the Trump administration and David Sachs to say, please put your stable coin on my pre-mined coin because my foundation owns 50% on a company balance sheet and I want to become the future Federal Reserve. And of course, Trump wants to become the future Federal Reserve. And Elon wants to become the future Federal Reserve. And PayPal wants to become the future Federal Reserve. But Bitcoin is built on proof of work. So we have the resistance. And your job is simply to avoid the speculation and own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month in order to have the digital scarce asset that you can own and that you can send anywhere, while others are being tricked into sell their Bitcoin with shitcoin money printing, fiat money printing, and centralized honey traps like BlackRock and various other services. So I hope that inspires you to understand why you are alive at such an interesting time. Now, I'm going to go into the second section today. Now that you get what's happening in Bitcoin with the stablecoin standards, the technocratic side, and the EU authoritarian central bank digital currency side, let's now go deep. And I want to be really educational today. I hope you're enjoying it. In part 2, I'm going to be covering this week in macro and deconstruct exactly what I mean when I say a proof of weapons network. So I'm going to take a quick water, and what I'd love for you to do is help me out. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers because when I started telling the truth, at that point, there was no freedom of speech and they were censoring and shut down my channel. I need to get it reviewed on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. I'm about 8,000 subscribers away from getting to 100,000. YouTube will review it, and then I can show them that everything that they said was being censored was the truth now that it's being exposed. And I'm going to cover exactly what we said in the JFK files in the geopolitical section and how it relates to today. So do me that favor. I'm going to take a quick water, like, share, subscribe, put a comments down if you're watching the recording, and we're going to move into part 2 this week in macro and exposing the constructs of the proof of weapons network and how to survive it.